My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
All right. Very, very pleased to be joined by Leeshai Lemish, who's been with Shen Yun for 18 years. He earned his bachelor's degree in Chinese history and language from Pomona College in California, but a very, very well-educated guy with a master's degree in international relations from the London School of Economics. He has spent a whole bunch of time studying, working, and conducting research throughout East Asia. And he these days is the executive director with the New York-based Falun Dafa Information Center, which is an organization dedicated to ending the human rights abuses against people who practice Falun Gong in China. Lee, thank you so much for joining me on the radio. I appreciate you staying up late.
No problem. Happy to be here. I'm currently working with Shen Yun Performing Arts, and we're in the middle of tour. We're actually performing at Lincoln Center and traveling all over the world right now.
No, I know that. I want to ask you about that. Just to give folks a little bit of context, though, what is Falun Gong? I feel like, especially New Yorkers, but probably people all over the country, have seen Falun Gong activists approach them or just seen them around and have wondered, okay, who are these folks? Who are they? Let's start with that.
So Falun Gong is a meditation discipline that became very popular in China in the 1990s. It actually goes back a lot earlier than that. It has a tradition that was basically passed down from one master to disciple for many generations. And in China in the 1970s and 80s, there was this phenomena called the Qigong boom. And this was a period of time that saw parks across the country brimming at dawn with over 100 million people doing slow-moving Tai Chi type exercises. And it was very, very popular and beneficial to people's health. And at the very end of that, Master Li Hongzhi came out and introduced the practice of Falun Gong, or also known as Falun Dafa, to the public. And he said, okay, this is actually what these practices are for. They're not just for getting healthy and being fit, but they're actually about moral and spiritual elevation. And he taught the principles of the practice, which are based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And it's going to be free. And it's always going to be free. And the practice of Falun Gong then became extremely popular in the 90s and got to the point that by the late 90s, by 1999, the Chinese government itself estimated there were 70 to 100 million people in China practicing Falun Gong, and there were more people around the world. And at that point, the Communist Party leader at the time, Jiang Zemin, said, well, this is more people than we have members of the Chinese Communist Party. That's 66 million at the time. And this is not going to work. This is an ideological conflict. It's a threat to Marxism, and we're going to ban it. And at the time, there were a lot of top leaders in the Communist Party who said, we don't need to ban this. This is just a meditation and health exercise system. In fact, there were people who were party members who practiced Falun Gong. There were family members of the standing members of the Politburo who were practicing Falun Gong. And they all knew that it was not a threat. But Jiang Zemin was very adamant about it. And he said, we're going to crush this within 3 months. And if not, it's going to be the biggest embarrassment to the Communist Party. And so he launched his persecution campaign now 25 years ago, expecting to wipe it out right away. And what he didn't realize is that these millions of people, tens of millions of people in China, had benefited so much from the practice that they weren't going to give it up. And initially, they just thought it was one big misunderstanding. So they would go to the petition offices in their local cities and say, what is going on? You guys don't understand. We're not against the government. We're just meditating in the park in the morning, trying to be good people. And they would be arrested. And then their family members would then travel to Beijing to go to the National Petitions Office and say, why did you arrest my family members? And then they would be arrested. And within a few months, hundreds of thousands of people had disappeared into labor camps and concentration camps and sent into prison. And then they were being tortured and killed. And then a few years later, we found out that they were being, in many cases, killed for their organs. They had this large population of healthy prisoners of conscience. They didn't know what to do with them, and then they found a way to make it profitable. And estimates are in hundreds of thousands of people who have been killed for their organs. We're not talking about kidneys, and they're being killed while alive. The organs extract. It's execution by organ removal. And so this has been described by some as the crime of the century, and it's been very well documented, even though our mainstream media will not cover this. And in fact, there was a reporter for the New York Times, a woman by the name of Didi Tatlow, who wanted to report on this, and the editors at the Times told her not to cover it, to drop the story.
So
there's a lot of interest.
What is behind that? Why would there not be interest from the mainstream press? Is that a case of the American mainstream press not wanting to stand up to the Chinese government, or is there some other reason at play?
Well, if you look in the context of the time that we're looking at, the early 2000s, before the Beijing Olympics, about 10 years after the Tiananmen massacre, I think the West, and especially the United States, had this dream that by just interacting with China, with communist-ruled China, we're going to be able to bring freedoms and maybe democratization, and the forces of the market will open things up, and this will have a very positive effect. It was kind of this dream, Kissinger and people before that, around that time were playing this up, and a lot of them were actually getting paid by Chinese consultancies to do these kinds of things. But that whole story aside, there was this feeling that that was possible, and at the same time, there was a lot of money to be made. And for mainstream newspapers, and this also happened with CNN and with other entities, they wanted access to the Chinese market. And if they reported on Falun Gong, if they wrote about the Dalai Lama or other human rights issues, their magazines would be taken off of newsstands. Their internet websites would be shut down, and they would lose access. Their journalists would lose their visas. They could not report from China anymore, and they would lose access to the market. That's one big force. The other thing that you kind of, at the time, nobody knew what Falun Gong was. And even today, that's the first question you asked me.
Yep.
There's still not a lot of clarity on what this is, because there's been so much propaganda coming out of the CCP from Beijing, because this is what they do. They're really good at running propaganda campaigns. And they took advantage of the fact that people in the West didn't know what this was. And so the media in the West started just mimicking the news that was coming out of Xinhua News Agency, which was, this is an anti-China group, and they're dangerous to society, they're anti-humanity, anti-science. These are the kinds of words that they're using. And we banned them according to law in order to protect, China and the world. And the West just kind of like, okay, the Chinese government says this. Meanwhile, outside of China, especially in 1999, 2000, Falun Gong practitioners, there are not that many of them. And people like myself who are outside of China practicing Falun Gong, we didn't know anything about politics. We didn't know anything about mobilization or media or anything like that. We were just interested in meditating. We were people who were like, in some cases, a little like hippies. We wanted to meditate under a tree in a park. This is what we were interested in. Oh, Eastern stuff. And we found this practice and we loved it. And that's what we were interested in. All of a sudden, people just like us in China are being tortured and killed. And in some cases, family members of people that we know. And Chinese people in the diaspora here have family members in China that are now disappearing in a labor camp. They don't know if they're dead or alive. And so we say, what can we do to rescue them? And so that's when you start seeing parades. And you see, if you remember, 20 years ago or so, on the streets of New York City, there were these torture exhibits trying to show what was happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the flyers, and then you have media entities that come up and websites and all kinds of things like this to try to raise awareness. And, we pounded pavement in Washington trying to get Congress to pay attention to this and writing letters and all these different things. And around 2006, a group of artists from around the world who practice Falun Gong said, well, what can we do with our skill set? These were some of the top choreographers and composers from China who had left China, some of them were in the U.S. and Australia and Canada. And they said, well, we have these talents that we can maybe use to this. Why don't we put together a performance? And we'll do a couple of things with this show. First, we will, in the performance, tell the story of what's happening to Falun Gong practitioners in China. And we will show people that people like us who practice Falun Gong are normal people and happy and well-balanced and can, just like you, and can perform. And at the same time, we will have as our mission to revive the real traditional Chinese culture, the culture the Chinese Communist Party has destroyed over 75 years of rule. And it started off with small-scale productions like a Chinese New Year show, a gala. We had one, I remember one that I did in LA, and another one, bigger one in 2006 at Radio City Music Hall. And then they said, okay, there's a lot of potential here. Let's do this for real. And then that's when Shen Yun Performing Arts was established. It was established a couple hours outside of New York City in the Hudson Valley, right there between Middletown and Port Jervis and Deer Park. And we started a world tour in late 2006, 2007. We toured all over the world, about 30 cities. And then the next year, we added a second performing arts troupe. So then we had 2 companies touring the world at the same time, and then a third. And now we have 8, 18 years into this.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about Shen Yun. Shen Yun, as you just alluded to, it's often described as more than just a performance, but some people call it an act of defiance. What do you think makes Shen Yun such a threat to the Chinese Communist Party, if it is?
Yeah, and well, I'll start by saying that what a missed opportunity for the Chinese Communist Party and the leadership in China. Here you have a company that is celebrating traditional Chinese culture and showing it all over the world at Lincoln Center right now. We were at Kennedy Center last month, right? What an opportunity to say, hey, let's support this. This is great. Soft power, right? But no, instead they say we got to stop this. And what are they afraid of course, is the big question. So I think it's those exact 2 things that really make Shen Yun unique. First of all, Shen Yun is based outside of China. It's not within their control. It's not within their monopoly on Chinese culture. It's in a way they see it as a competitor, right? So it's independent. They can't control it. You got to start with that. But then it's a group of Falun Gong practitioners who started this and people who practice Falun Gong who are in the company. And anything that Falun Gong practitioners have tried to do, be it a parade or a newspaper or a performance, they try to stop it. And this has been the case for 25 years. So, and not only that, within the show, we have about 20 pieces in a performance. It goes by really, really fast. Each piece is about 5 minutes long. Within those 20 pieces, there will be 1 or 2 pieces in every performance that tell the story of the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China and the courage of the resistance and defiance that is really based on faith and based on a hope for freedom. The courage of the people in China, including the courage of bystanders and them choosing right over wrong. And these tend to be some of the pieces that are most memorable for audience members. It's not uncommon to see people in tears when they even just talk about it after the show. And so this is terrifying to the CCP, because they're saying this is a persecution they've tried to cover up for 25 years. They're saying it doesn't exist. They say that Falun Gong practitioners are crazy. And here you see this beautifully depicted on stage in front of members of Congress and parliament members and royalty and CEOs and Hollywood, producers at the best theaters around the world. And so then they're seeing this in a very moving way. So that's the very big reason. And the second reason is, if you've seen our billboards, which are hard not to see these days, our tagline is right there. It says, China before communism. That is the mission of the company. Even more than telling a story of Falun Gong, it's really about reviving this lost heritage. So if you go back to Mao's China, when they took over in the 1949, and then especially during the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 70s, what the Communist Party set out to do was wipe out the culture that had been there for 5,000 years. They knew that unless they were able to remove it, they could not bring in this Soviet import of Marxism and Leninism and Stalinism and all the things that they wanted to do. And so they made students beat up their parents and their teachers, and they burned Confucius books and artworks and razed temples to the ground, and in the process killed 60 to 80 million people. And so they completely wiped out this culture, and there's just a tiny bit of it left. And that's what survived, and that's what Shen Yun is now bringing back. So when people see the show, they remember, oh, this is what China used to be like. This is the China. Some audience members, Chinese people, will say, I remember my grandmother telling me stories about this back when I was a kid before the communists came.
Wow.
I haven't heard about these stories since then.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for an Oikos remix. Like a crunchy storm of sea salt praline pretzels, dark chocolate, and butter toffee, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 Oikos Remix varieties with epic mix-ins and 11 grams of complete protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See RemixYogurt.com.
Hi, this is Javon, your Blinds.com design consultant.
Oh, wow. A real person.
Yep, I'm here to help with everything from selecting the perfect window treatments to...
Well, I've got a complicated project.
No problem. I can even help schedule a professional measure and install. We can also send you samples fast and free.
I just might have to do more.
Whatever you need.
So the first room we're looking at is for...
Shop Blinds.com now and get up to 50% off with minimum purchase. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
If people are just tuning in, my guest is Leeshai Lemish. He is, among other things, the host of the podcast Shen Yun Voices. He's been a featured guest on a lot of radio and TV talk shows speaking about this, and even testified on transnational repression in front of Congress. And if you want to see Shen Yun, they're performing in New York City at Lincoln Center. We're going to tell you how you could get tickets and see the show in just a minute. But Lee, you've been with Shen Yun really since its founding in 2006. How have you seen the Chinese Communist Party's attacks against the company evolve over the years?
Yeah, so very much from day one, we saw that wherever we go, there's a shadow of, we didn't even know it was called transnational repression at the time, but this kind of interference is what we called it back then, of the CCP trying to stop us. And so in the very beginning, what they would do is they would send out other performing arts companies to compete with us. They would send their own companies, they would pay I think they sent like over 100 just the first year. And we would perform in one theater and they'd be across the street. And if we had to reschedule, that they would reschedule too. And their theaters were empty. But sometimes people would get confused and go to that show by mistake. And so that really didn't work. Then what we found is the theaters would start telling us, we got a letter from the Chinese embassy, we got a letter from the consulate, and they would give us copies of these letters. I have them on my website. And they're saying it's all this propaganda stuff. And don't let Shen Yun perform. And if you do, this will negatively affect U.S.-China relations. We will not bring performing arts companies to your theater. You will lose your sister city relationship. You might lose your Confucius Institute. This will, have detrimental financial repercussions. And they tried doing this for a few years. And of course, in a lot of places that backfired. I remember in Little Rock, Arkansas, the theater manager said, no, this is the U.S. You're not going to tell us what we can and cannot see. Please go away. We were in Australia, in the capital, in Canberra, and I walked outside the theater going back to the hotel after the show, and I met 2 parliament members. And they said they all got the letter. The whole parliament got the letter. They had enough people who got the letter and said, oh, let's check it out, that they could have passed legislation, they said, in the theater that day, because so many of them showed up to find out what the deal was. So that kind of didn't work. So then you see a mixture of other attempts like tire slashing. This is probably the most violent thing we've seen, where we discovered cuts on our buses' front tires that were done in such a way that the tire would not deflate instantly, but would explode at high speed on the freeway. This is what the mechanic told us when we brought it in. We discovered this crescent-shaped cut on a tire. And this happened on multiple vehicles around the same time. It happened again in Costa Mesa last year. Fortunately, we do pre-trip inspections. But this is, a bus that carries 30, 40 performers on a highway. And there were multiple other attempts to tamper with our vehicles. Then we had hacking of our website. Just a few days ago, our website was attacked by 10,000 IPs at the same time. There's 10,000 different IPs at the same time, and to try to shut it down, try to hack our ticketing system. Performers get death threats. our choreographer's house in Otisville, New York, the sleepy village of Otisville. His house was broken into, and the only thing that was stolen was his laptop, not the jewelry that was on the table. We've had family members of performers back in China being threatened, in some cases being arrested and sentenced to jail. Everybody in the company is blacklisted. Nobody can go back to China to see family members or even to visit. And it just goes on and on and on. And they one thing that they did was they're trying to influence, and we're seeing more of this now the last year, and I can get that in a second, trying to influence mainstream opinion against Shen Yun. And so one of the things that they did is they had, I don't know if you remember this from a few years ago, they had this insert called the China Watch that they would put in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post carried it, a bunch of other papers carried it all over the world. And it looked just like a regular news article, but it wasn't. It was a paid insert, courtesy of China Daily, the CCP's mouthpiece. And it was they had these articles attacking Shen Yun, and it looked like it was a Washington Post writing that about Shen Yun. And then they would try to have their commentators, they have this thing called the 50-cent army, which are these people that supposedly get paid 50 cents per post or per hour, I don't know what they get paid, to write reviews. So, I'm on stage. I see the audience after every show, and I see how happy they are and how much they enjoy it. But then you go on all these review platforms, and you have all these negative copy-pasted reviews about the show. Well, it turns out there's people there, they're probably just using AI bots at this point. And then what happened is about a year and a half ago, we got leaked documents from inside China that came out through the Falun Dafa Information Center. And they came out through 3 different sources. And they were notes from a meeting that took place at the highest level of CCP between the Ministry of State Security and the Ministry of Public Security. And they laid out a new campaign and basically acknowledged that all that they've done over the last 2 decades to target Falun Gong and Shen Yun specifically has failed. All these things that I just described. And they need to up the game and really defeat us once and for all in America. And what they said they're going to do is they're going to use lawfare to try to have frivolous lawsuits against Shen Yun. They're going to try to incite investigations, and they're going to try to weaponize social media with the ultimate goal of weaponizing mainstream American media to attack Shen Yun. And really, this is a kind of a template, a proof of concept, if you will, for how to take down anybody they want in the United States. And this is their most advanced form of transnational repression. They're talking about activating sleeper cells of spies within the community to basically try to sow discord between different American groups, in this case between people who practice Falun Gong or people who watch Shen Yun or support Shen Yun, including members of Congress, against other Americans, and to pit one group against the other. And so very shortly after these documents came out, over the summer, we started seeing these social media influencers, some of whom were specifically mentioned in these CCP documents, starting to up the ante against Shen Yun, just one video after another. We saw YouTubers who are not Chinese talk about how they were offered money to do videos attacking Shen Yun. We see attacks against Shen Yun in the New York Times, 10 articles since August, just hit piece one after another going after Shen Yun. We saw lawsuits against our headquarters in Deer Park, New York, that one of them, these lawsuits that were filed, the last one of them was dismissed with prejudice, which means you cannot refile it because there's no grounds for it. And it just goes on and on and on. And this is the thing we're facing now, including a lot more death threats. We've gotten 24 of them this month alone. I think we've had over 40 this past tour. Threats of bombing, threats of shooting, and there's nothing there. These are threats that are just trying to scare people. So that's what we're facing right now, and it's the most potent form of transnational repression that we've seen. There are 2 spies that were caught in a sting operation by the FBI for trying to undermine our nonprofit status, and they were getting their orders directly from the PRC, but they were operating in LA and in New York. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that's going on that we're not even aware of.
Wow. You got to come back because I have pages worth of questions that I didn't get to here. But if people want to see a Shen Yun at Lincoln Center in New York City, how do they do that? How do they get tickets? What's the best way to do that?
Well, you can go to Lincoln Center, or you can go to shenyun.com. That's SHENYUN.com. We'll be there until the 12th. That's quite a run. And then you can learn more about the company if you want to go to shenyun.org. There's a lot more about these stories, a lot of videos you can watch, and you can go to Shen Yun Voices, the podcast you mentioned. You can see what the performers themselves have to say. Listen, we're talking about the CCP and all this nasty stuff, but the performance itself is gorgeous. The costumes, the dance, the music, it's really amazing. It's a joy to be a part of. And it's got a really uplifting and inspiring feel that I think touches people regardless of the cultural background. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, that's outstanding. Leeshai Lemish, thank you very, very much. If folks want to comment, you can jump on board at 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. We'll continue on the other side of midnight, straight ahead.